All right, this lesson is for students that were absent. We're going to go ahead and go over Chapter 2, Lesson 2.1.3, What Does Minus Mean? Writing Algebraic Expressions. And in this section, we're taking a look at an organizational tool called an expression map. So you'll see here, this is called an expression map. And today's purpose is to represent expressions using the expression map. But before we began, we talked about what does minus mean. And these are some of the terms that the students in the class came up with. Subtract, take away, minus, opposite. So for example, if this says 5 minus 2, this means negative x or the opposite of x. This here is opposite of negative 3. So that was our first discussion. Then we took a look at different ways of representing negative 3. But before, we need to realize that we're not always going to have colored algebra tiles. So this here, if they are shaded, they represent positive. So this is positive 5, this is positive 3x. When they are empty or unshaded, they represent negative. So this is negative 3, and this is negative 2y. And so this example that we went over represents negative 3 in two ways. So you have a positive region here and a negative region or opposite region down below in our expression map. So if I drag 3 tiles, this represents negative 3. Well, if I place 3 positive tiles in the negative or opposite region, that also represents negative 3. Because think, the opposite of positive 3 is negative 3. All right, so now we were asked to build the negative 2x. Well, if I put negative 2x, this here is one way. But then I can also think about my negative or opposite region and say the opposite of a positive 2x also gives me negative 2x. And then this next example, I have negative 3x minus the opposite of negative 4. Or I can say the opposite of 3x and the opposite of negative 4. Both of these expressions will represent negative 3x minus the quantity of negative 4. All right, our next example tells us to build negative 3x plus 4. So I drag negative 3x tiles plus 4. But I can also show that the opposite of 3x is negative 3x, and the opposite of negative 4 is positive 4. So I can also use that negative or opposite region to represent this expression. All right, moving on. I have minus the quantity of x minus 2, also known as the opposite of y minus 2. So let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to go into my negative or opposite region and say I'm talking about the opposite of y minus 2. That is one way to represent. Or I can say, well, the opposite of negative y is y, and the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. So that's another way of represent this expression two different ways. Let's go ahead and continue. We now need to build negative y minus 3. So I have a negative y. I'll make it a little taller so it looks more like a y than an x. And then minus 3. Now, if I want to use the opposite or the negative region, I can say, well, the opposite of a positive y is negative y, and the opposite of positive 3 is negative 3. And this last one on the let's try slide, 5x minus the quantity of 3 minus 2x. So I'm going to go ahead and drag my positive 5x's. And I have the minus and the parentheses. So what I'm going to do is go to my negative region, my opposite region, and say that this means 5x minus positive 3 minus 2x. Or I can also say, well, the opposite of 5x is negative 5x. So let me drag those here and I say, okay, since these negative 5x's are in the opposite region, I know that this actually means positive 5x. And then I'm just going to copy the same that I have here and drag those on this side. That one. So that's another way to represent this expression. We then moved on to the next problem in which we are going to do the opposite. We're now going to be given algebra tiles on the positive and the negative region, and we have to come up with the expression. So in this problem, we need to reverse our thinking to write an expression. So let's take a look here. So I see 2 positive x's and I see 3 negative 1 tiles. So that represents 2x minus 3. Here, since we're in the opposite region, I'm going to say that I'm in the opposite region. So I'm going to put minus, and I am taking the opposite of y minus 4. Or we can see it as the opposite of y is negative y, and the opposite of negative 4 is positive 4. So either of those two expressions is represented given this expression max. And our last one, let's go ahead, our last two problems. So here I have 3 x's in the positive region, and in the opposite region, I'm going to put minus the opposite of negative xy and positive 2. Or I can say I have 3x and then just take the opposite. The opposite of negative xy is positive xy, and the opposite of 2 is negative 2. So either of those two expressions work as well. All right, now this one here, I have 2x on top, a positive 2, and a negative 1. And then down below, I have minus the opposite of 3. Or I could have said 2x plus 2 minus 1, and then just take the opposite of 3, which is negative 3. Now, I understand that some of you may be able to already simplify this, and that is great. But in this case, if we just write out the expression, then I am happy with that. All right, so again, we took a look at here it goes. We took a look at what does minus mean using the expression math on how to write algebraic expressions.